Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to take a first look at We Are Coming Nineveh from Nuts Publishing. Now this might be one of the more intriguing tabletop wargame designs I've had a chance to look at in the 2 years since I've been back at tabletop wargaming. There's a controversial conflict between Iraqi Security Forces and Daesh, aka ISIS forces, in West Mosul from February 2017 to July 2017. I find this game noteworthy for a couple of reasons. First up, this is a very controversial conflict. We've got human rights criticisms laid on both sides. We've got the atrocities of the Daesh, which are well known. We've got civilian casualties, child combat units, an urban, messy political landscape for warfare. And this game doesn't whitewash anything, so it's going to jump right in and explore this. As a matter of fact, the background of this game was a course at McGill University designed to help students understand the conflict better. On a less stark note, the mechanics of the game strike me as being incredibly innovative in a way to try to capture this messy, dark landscape for warfare. Now this is a two-player game, but there is a full solo mode that you can play, a deck of cards to control the Daesh forces if you want to play against them as the Iraqi Security Forces. So we have single player, two-player, lots of fog of war, and some creative mechanics that explore this extraordinarily controversial conflict. Let's jump in and get started and take a look at what's inside the box. I really like the cover here. We Are Coming Nineveh is the name of the operation by the Iraqi Security Forces to retake Mosul. And this, I think the cover captures the nature of the combat. We've got a gritty urban landscape, helicopters, identifying some targets on the ground. There's a tremendous fog of war and difficulty from both sides identifying their opponents during this combat. Now, let's flip it over. Oh, kind of a note to the designers too. Juliette Lamenahez, Harrison Brewer, Rex Brynan, and Brian Train. Apologies for any incorrections with some pronunciation there. But let's now flip this over and take a look at the back side here, just some of the general parameters. So gameplay says 1 to 2 players. There is a full solo mode included in the game. We'll take a look at that deck of cards that controls their play. You can play solo as the Iraqi Security Forces, but not as the Daesh. So the solo mode controls the Daesh forces. Age level 14 plus, we'll talk more about complexity as we get inside. Although I will say this is a surprisingly accessible game for the number and kind of variety of mechanics and novelty of the mechanics included. Time duration says 90 minutes. This feels about right. I'm going to guess 60 to 120, but certainly it feels like a game that's playable in a single sitting. So from that perspective, another thing that I think is going to be pretty easy to get to the table. Now from scale, there are a potential of 12 turns in the game. Each turn represents about 10 days to 2 weeks of time. And I would put this probably at the kind of low operational, high tactical level. There are about 70,000 Iraqi security forces in the area for this battle, so that gives you a rough idea on the scale. And this game covers kind of the last third, if you would, the final push to kind of eradicate the Daesh control of West Mosul. So it's the last surge and the most violent and deadly portion of this entire conflict that the game covers. Let's open it up now and take a look at what's inside. All right, so we've got two pieces of documentation, a rulebook and some design notes. Let's take a look. Let's start out with the rulebook, which is 20 pages long. And the back end here is a game component summary. Then we've got a couple of pages here on solitaire play. We'll talk a little bit about more on that as we look at components. So really kind of probably 16 pages here, not counting the cover, 15, 14 pages of rules. Very well spaced, 2 columns. I've read through them in under an hour with an intent to learn. So I would give this game probably a 3.5 out of 10 on a complexity scale. There are some novelties to the mechanics and a good number of things that you're going to be kind of working out as you set up the game and start to play, and some kind of some edge case rules to kind of handle and things like that. But certainly I think this is a game that is going to be a game you can get to the table. It's a very accessible game, both to learn, to play, and to teach from kind of reading through the rules here now. So a couple of other kind of general elements about the game. We've got some pictures here. These are blocks. It's a block-based game, and you're going to be standing the blocks up to hide them from your opponent to capture that fog of war element. As we can kind of take a look, we'll take a look as we see on some of the stickers for the blocks. You're going to be rotating them to indicate step losses, and I think they have 3 or 4 step losses per unit, depending upon the unit. We also have area control movement on the map, so it's a beautiful map of Mosul, as we'll take a look at that. There are a number of elements in here that I think are probably worth mentioning, and we'll talk about those as we get to the decks too, because they're going to kind of indicate a few of the mechanics there. But in particular, I at first thought, wow, this is pretty complex. But then when you get into kind of the core gameplay in terms of the sequence of play, so you're going to have a support phase, movement phase, combat phase, and then a turn-in phase. Players take turns and they go back and forth. Both from a movement perspective and from a combat perspective, it's very straightforward. So in particular, although there are some optional rules and some other rules rules that surround this core gameplay. It's not super complex. It's going to be relatively straightforward to learn, and I think it's going to be pretty easy to kind of execute. And having said that, I think there are enough things surrounding this, in particular with the game setup, that's going to make it a very replayable game, and we'll talk about that as we start to look at some of the cards. So there we go. We also have in the back here 2 pages of rules for solitaire play. Again, you can play as the Iraqi Security Forces against the Daesh forces if you choose this option. You can't play the other way, but it looks like a fairly robust system for solitaire. And again, as we see the components, we'll kind of get a better look at some of those elements of the game. Let's take a look now at the design notes document. Design notes document really kind of captures a couple of elements. It's 12 pages long. It's broken up mainly into 2 parts. One is kind of a historical backdrop to the conflict itself, the rise of the Daesh, and then the battle here in particular. Iraqi fights back, of course, Mosul in Iraq. And then a little bit here too as we get here on design notes for the game, talking about some of the ethical decisions in here. And I think there is, there's a clear acknowledgement that this is a game that it covers a conflict with a huge element of both controversy and murkiness. And indeed, as we look at some of the victory conditions, it's a very innovative approach to some of the victory conditions here, given the murkiness of the conflict. So, and it does mention as well, this game has an educational backdrop. It was designed at McGill University to help students understand the conflict better, and has been used in a variety of educational contexts since then, with an intent from the designers to help us both understand conflicts like this in order to learn from them and prevent them from happening in the future. So there we go on the design notes and things. Let's take a look here at our components now too. So we've got a lot to look at. First, let's probably pull the blocks out here and the stickers and take a look at those. So we have 2 sticker sheets here. The top one here, and again, you can see we're not looking at a massive game here in terms of components and elements here. The blocks, if we take a look at these are blocks, they're about 3/4 of an inch, look to be a good thickness and nice quality. I mean, they're good colors, and they're blocky blocks, and they look like they're going to work very, very well. These are the stickers for almost all of the forces in the game. We have a couple of others here for markers, and these are for headquarters and leader units for the forces too. If we look at the main bulk of the stickers here, though, we can see we've got the Iraqi forces up top here, and then the Daesh forces down here. There is quite a variety here, and this is probably a time to mention this. We're going to see this in the cards too. But one of the elements of setup is that both sides are going to get core units, and then you're going to get capability points. And with those capability points, you add in different other capability cards or other units. For example, these child combat forces are added in as a capability that can be optional for the Daesh forces. Largely, the explosive devices can have the same type of way. For the Iraq forces, you're going to have capabilities for air support and artillery support, other units that are going to be brought in as optional elements to there. So you're almost designing the game in terms of designing your force. You've got this core force, but then each time you play, you're going to be able to pick quite a variety of capabilities that you're going to be able to add to make your force for that particular game unique, which means you're probably not going to be playing the same game twice. Added into that is a really cool element that we'll take a look at with victory conditions and with some of the victory cards that we'll look up. That means that the scoring for the game, which is kind of on 2 different metrics, also has some complexities within those metrics, which means that the game can actually end with both sides claiming victory. It's really cool. We'll take a look at it as we get there. But these are the stickers. I like the design, very simple, very legible. Looks like it's going to work out really well from a design standpoint. Now let's jump into the cards here. And this is where we get, I think, some of the subtleties of the gameplay. There are 5 decks of cards. There's an event deck, there's a military council deck, which is used for the solitaire bot for the Daesh forces, and then we get these capability decks for each side, as well as kind of additional units. So let's start out though with the event deck, which is just massive. So when you are executing combat in a particular area, which is based on die rolls, we've got 2 dice here. When a side rolls a 1 or a 6 in combat, if the number matches the top card on that event deck, they trigger that event. And as we can see here, we've got a hefty collection of events. There's a lot of event cards in here, and many of them are extremely unique. So they could go both ways, they can change things. The idea from the designer's perspective here is really to capture the unpredictability of war, and that, no good plan survives contact with the enemy. Here's a couple that are the same here too. So there are some that are the same, but an incredible range of events here in the pictures. I mean, just really helping to kind of pull you into the conflict and again, create a situation where it's going to be really tough to have to play the same game twice. I think there's going to be a lot of variety in here, even though you're fighting the same conflict. Angry soldiers seek revenge for Daesh atrocities. Poor coordination hampers operations. I've got a few of those. Friendly fire, number of friendly fire. Chasing ghosts. There is one unit in the game, too, for the Daesh forces, which are rumors. So it's actual unit on the board, and then when you get there, disappear. So it's kind of trying to capture that uncertainty of where the enemy is, which was in particular a problem that the Iraqi Security Forces had in this conflict, was identifying who the enemy was and trying to distinguish them from civilians here. So we can see that, you know, and if you're rolling a 1 or a 6, is 1 in 6 chance, you're going to trigger a lot of these in a game. I can really see this for creating kind of a pretty unique and varied gameplay each time you jump into a game. So that is the event card there. Let's take a look now at some of the capability cards. So these are the Daesh forces here, and we can see capability cards go down here. We get additional units. This is a card for the leader. The veterans, these are some of your core units. So we get veterans, kind of distinguishing them, militia, and then improvised explosive devices. These are some of the things that you can add in there. Then the capability cards here are the ones that have a cost to them. So you get a certain number of capability points before the game starts. You can spend 2 to buy 1 of these technicals, or 6 to buy 2 of these technicals, and then it tells you what the capacity of this technical is. Suicide vests, man-pads, Ashbal, these are the child units, so you can spend 2 to buy 3, so you can stay behind force, arms cache. So you can see, and look at the variety here. I mean, this is guerrilla training, snipers, improved infantry training, chemical weapons, makeshift drones. So the capacity to make your force unique from both sides, large tunnel networks, you could spend some of your capacity to build your large tunnel network under the city to kind of enhance your movement capacity before the conflict starts. So you've got this massive deck of capabilities that you can pick out for each different conflict, making, again, your force pretty unique for each time you're going to play this game. Now let's take a look here at the capability units here for the Iraqi Security Forces. So we've got core units and capabilities, and it's basically the same kind of thing. This is a headquarters. Each of the there's 3 main core Iraqi forces, and each one has their own headquarters, and there is a command and control element and an element that the headquarters can influence gameplay with some extra commands and things like that. So we got coalition air support. These are the capability ones here. Iranian advisors, because again, the Iraqi Security Forces were assisted by both Western forces and Iranian forces in this conflict. Enhanced EOD capacity, human intelligence, rules of engagement, counterterrorism service, that's one of the core units, rules of engagement for the Iraqi army. And all of these either can be card-based or unit-based or action-based type of capabilities. And we have, again, got just a massive range of these capabilities that you can add to kind of, depending upon which type of conflict and which type of battle you want to fight as you're kind of going in here as either side. And I would think, too, that playing this, the uniqueness of the capabilities for both sides, they're going to create some unique combinations. So you're going to probably get into the game because you have no idea what your opponent picked until you start. And then it's going to be kind of trying to figure out, okay, how can this set of capabilities and units that I've got kind of work out to be able to make it work for me against the set that the enemy has picked. So here we also have now, we've got the priority cards. Each side has 3 priority cards. And let's talk a little bit about how these work, because we have 3 core victory tracks: a collateral damage, a time track. So basically the Iraqi Security Forces are trying to go fast, take the city as quickly as possible. So making it a short conflict works to their advantage. Minimizing collateral damage for the Iraqi Security Forces works to their advantage. Works, again, the opposite. So for the Daesh forces, both of the conflict is longer and there's more collateral damage. That's good for them. And then casualties. This means Iraqi Security Forces inflicting casualties on the Daesh forces. So you have these 3 victory point tracks, and depending upon the actions that you take in the game, you're going to be increasing and decreasing scores on these tracks. However, at the beginning of the game, you choose one of these 3 tracks, for both players, choose one of these 3 tracks secretly to emphasize, and you put that card down, hidden on the game board. At the end of the game, you flip it up and show the one that you were emphasizing. And that scores double points on the victory point track. which is kind of cool. So you can really, again, you can see some variety here. You can say, okay, this time I'm going to try to win as fast as I possibly can. Not going to worry too much about collateral damage and casualties. We're just going to try to achieve our objectives as quickly as we possibly can. And so, and yet the Daesh forces are trying to do the opposite. So you've got some unique combinations in there. Again, the whole idea, I think, as I look at this is, even though this is a game that kind of simulates the same conflict, there's going to be a tremendous amount of variety as you play it. I'm really excited to kind of dig in and give it a shot. And then the last deck here is the Military Council. The Military Council is the solo deck that's used to control the Daesh forces in the solitaire game. And basically each one of these cards, and I'll show some close-ups on these, each one of these cards is basically a set of instructions for the Daesh forces to execute. And then the rule book has, in that solitaire section, it has some parameters on how to execute these. Now the rule book also does mention that it's not going to be a perfect 100% game flow system. There are going to be cases where you're going to need to make decisions for the Daesh forces, but it's designed as kind of an overall guide to guide their play, with the idea that the human player is going to supplement those decisions with kind of obvious decisions in the cases where the rules don't really kind of clarify everything. But we have a good number of options here, a pretty good deck that's going to kind of guide Daesh forces and guide their actions throughout the campaign. So great to see a dedicated solo mode here, and I know that a lot of people that watch these videos are very much into the solitaire experience. We do have a very small set of counters. There is a disruption mechanic, both if you've got overstacking in an area and then a tunnel network, and these are the only real counters that these are used for, and there are a couple of other ones that I'm not quite sure what they do yet. So we've got some disruption units and then tunnels to mark if the Daesh forces have picked that tunnel capability. It might not even be in the game based on what capabilities they have picked. Lastly, let's take a look at our map here. Now the map is, I'll show a zoom out of this as I pull it out. It's 23.5 inches by 33 inches roughly, fully mounted, and I really like the design on it. It's, again, with the whole overall design, it feels both modern and at the same time detailed, with a lot of attention to history. This map looks really cool. We can see over here on the right side the old city, and the stacking, because this is such a congested area, we can see the stacking limits, which are off on the right here, and the stacking limit for the old city is only 2 units into a different area there. We've got stacking limit in some of the open areas is 4, and then stacking limits in the city areas is actually 3. So stacking varies as you go through. And movement's very simple. It's by and large 1 square per turn, although there are some capacities for units to extend that or to move along the roads for accelerated movement. So you've got kind of movement network, but it's relatively straightforward. And combat's going to be whenever you have units in the same area at the end of movement, they're going to fight it out with a dice roll based mechanic, trying to hit other units on dice rolls, and then there's retreat options and extended combat for each one of those segments as well. But yeah, a lot of historical detail here. We can see train station or oil storage. Each one of the areas is named. And then we've got this battle for the old city. And of course, the Great Mosque of Al-Nuri is the kind of the ultimate objective, I think, for the Iraqi Security Forces and kind of the headquarters of the Daesh forces. There is also a supply mechanic here. You're going to be tracing supply to either edge of the map for both Daesh forces and the Iraqi forces here as we kind of look at how the game plays out. So there we go. The last thing I want to kind of talk about a little bit here are the victory conditions, because they are kind of unique, and I think it's worth calling them out. So page 14 and 15 here of the rulebook identifies and clarifies and walks through the two different victory systems is the right way to put it. You can have over here a definitive victory point system by tallying up the victory tracks, both from time, collateral damage, and casualties, doubling the one that each side has chosen to double, and then you get a victory in here where less than 35 victory points is a major Iraqi victory, more than 50 is a major Daesh victory. And so this provides a definitive system to do that. But you also have these victory conditions that are listed depending upon the score in each one of the tracks. And this is what's called kind of the narrative outcome. So you might, for example, say if the time metric was 9, this would be the historical narrative victory condition that you've established in the game. game. So it says, well, Daesh has put up stiff resistance. The ISF player, the Iraqi player, has outperformed their historical counterparts. And then you would look at the score, say, for example, on Casualties, would say if it was 3-4, it says the Iraqi Security Forces have lost several hundred personnel, with a much larger number wounded in action. But then say collateral damage was like a 10 or an 11, civilian deaths are estimated to have exceeded 5,000 during Iraqi government operations, earning widespread condemnation. Massive displacement of the civilian population has led to a growing humanitarian crisis across northern Iraq. And the idea behind it from the designer perspective is you have to kind of figure out as that two-player thing. You can literally argue over the victory of the game depending upon where those tracks sit, because the Daesh player might be saying, well, we created this like humanitarian crisis, and the Iraqi says, well, we captured it faster than our historical counterparts, and we didn't suffer very many casualties. So from, it creates this kind of murkiness of victory condition, which I think I've not really seen something like this done in a game before. A game that literally says you can get to the end of the game and have to still argue over who won, which is kind of the designer's point, which is that this is kind of a politically murky, dirty, messy conflict without clear outcomes. And they wanted to capture that type of event in this game system. I think this is a really intriguing system in kind of a very kind of unique way to kind of establish victory in a game that is so fitting for a conflict like this. And then again, they do say you have the victory point system if you need to establish ultimate control, but even then you can be arguing back and forth over which of those tracks is the more legitimate way to measure what just happened in the game. So again, a lot of unique, I think, elements to this game, both in terms of setting up your forces, but the victory conditions, some of the mechanics, the capabilities, the controversial nature of this conflict. Just an absolutely fascinating game to take a look at. I will be bringing some gameplay of this game to the channel at some point in time. I do have a number of games in the queue before this, but I definitely want to bring the solo mode to the channel and take a look at this one probably later in the summer as we get going. I'd love to hear your questions down below. Let me know what you think. I'd be happy to answer questions to the degree that I can. I will put a link to the playthrough episode as soon as it's ready. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, and we will see you again on other videos on the channel.